Anyone can be successful if they're prepared to do the hard things that pay that price. There's no success without work, sacrifice, and risk. If there was, it wouldn't be worth it anyway, because everyone would be doing it. Since the COVID pandemic, resilience has captured a much greater share of our collective consciousness. And as tends to happen at times like this, the world now seems to be flooded with resilience experts who profess to be able to teach us how to handle the most difficult situations effortlessly. Now, I'm not an expert in resilience per se, but through my own journey, I can confidently say that I've become an incredibly resilient person. I don't know, maybe it just comes with a little bit of age and maturity, but very little actually phases me these days. And over the course of my corporate career, I became really comfortable at handling all sorts of crises while operating at the highest levels. And if you were to ask the people who actually worked closely with me over those years, I'm sure they'd tell you that I am extremely calm under pressure. So in this world of trite and pedestrian advice on how to become more resilient, I was happy to find a beacon of hope. Steve Magnus released a book just a few months ago called Do Hard Things: Why We Get Resilience Wrong and the Surprising Science of Real Toughness. Now today, I'm going to start with a look at some of the principles that he outlines in the book, which in my opinion, beautifully describe the relationship between the choices we make and our level of resilience. Why do hard things? It's one thing to be able to handle adversity yourself, but when you lead others, you need to have the mental, emotional, and psychological resources to support them as well. Now this adds another layer of complexity to the resilience equation. Resilience is a core competency in being able to lead others, which is why one of the 7 imperatives of my no bullshit leadership framework is build resilience. Every truly great leader is demonstrably resilient. Now in Steve Magnus's book, he exposes some of the myths around resilience. One of the most striking of these is the outdated concept that acting tough is the same as actually being tough. It's not. This is the old suck it up, don't show any emotion and just get on with it mentality. And it effectively causes an individual to operate from a place of fear rather than a place of composure and control. Real strength is calm. It comes from within. It's about confidence, not arrogance. Now you may have heard me talk about this principle in a slightly different way. I talk about the difference between game face and grace under pressure. Now game face is the ability to put on a facade of control, to appear as though everything's okay because you've learned how to mask the crushing panic you feel inside. And look, learning to put on your game face isn't a bad place to start. If you can at least do that, you're less likely to negatively impact your people. But they'll be able to sense the incongruence between what you project outwardly and how you're feeling on the inside. This isn't real resilience. Grace under pressure, on the other hand, is the state when you are genuinely calm on the inside. You are confident, you're controlled, you're rational, you're relaxed. There's absolutely no disconnect between what you feel and what the people around you see. Now this takes a strong connection with the emotional aspects of any situation and the ability to control your mental, physical, and emotional state under any circumstances. This is real resilience. Another of the common myths about resilience is that you should avoid the pain and discomfort associated with any difficult situation by simply ignoring it. Now this is completely the opposite of how this principle actually works. If you ignore the pain and try to get by on bravado, you will come unstuck. Now, I mentioned in a previous podcast episode an interview that I listened to with adventurer Bear Grylls of Man vs. Wild fame. In this interview, he talked about his life as a member of the elite SAS, the British equivalent of the Navy SEALs. Now, during the weeding out process, the guys who were the most vocal and the most cocky about how tough they were invariably the first ones to fold when the real pressure was applied. This is the thing about resilience. You can't fake it. When the chips are really down, the cracks are going to appear and you'll collapse under the pressure. So the concept of resilience being somehow a measure of your ability to ignore pain and discomfort is a myth. Instead, you need to become incredibly attuned to listening to your body, reading the signals, and then dealing with them accordingly. Now, you wouldn't know it to look at me, but I used to run marathons. And I'm very grateful that I spent a number of years as a long distance runner. I ran countless of thousands of miles, often alone. And I learned to listen to the cues my body was sending me. I became incredibly sensitive to the feedback it was giving me. I could feel the onset of lactic acid buildup in my blood, and I interpreted that signal to ease off the pace ever so slightly so that I could come back from that threshold. If I felt a tweak in a muscle, I could tell whether it was signaling the risk of a potential injury, the first signs of a cramp, or just the onset of fatigue. Now, knowing the difference was critical in deciding whether to back off, to push through, or to pick up the pace. Resilience doesn't come from ignoring the warning signs. It comes from understanding them and dealing with them. Now, in a business context, there are loads of examples where this ability to read your own emotions and respond accordingly is critical to your performance under pressure. This is at the core of being a resilient leader. So, for example, in a high-stakes negotiation, you're in a situation that by its very nature is adversarial. It's common to experience many emotions, not all of them productive, trust me. So you've got fear, anger, apprehension, and frustration. They all just come with the territory in a big negotiation. Which is why learning how to read your own emotional responses, to understand them, and to choose an appropriate course of action is so important. Without this ability, you'll try to suppress the negative emotions. And the energy it takes to do this is all-consuming. It distracts you, it breaks your concentration, and it diminishes your ability to remain calm, decisive, and rational. I've never seen a great leader who isn't also a great negotiator. It takes enormous self-awareness and the ability to read and respond to your emotions without letting them dominate you. It takes resilience. Now, I want to take a quick look at the role that routine plays. What if you could do something simple every day to prepare yourself for any adversity when it comes your way? Resilience, in part, relies on the fact that you see difficult circumstances as being familiar. It's not all foreign. It's a place you've been before. You're physically and mentally prepared to take charge whenever the need arises. Now, there's an excellent podcast that I listen to occasionally called the Greg McKeown podcast. He released an episode some time ago, which we'll put a link to in the show notes, called The Genius of Routine. And in it, McKeown talks about the routine of Michael Phelps, the iconic American swimmer who won 23 gold medals across 4 separate Olympic Games. Phelps followed the identical routine in the lead up to every race. Everything from his stretching, to his in-pool warm-up, to his starting sequence. He had his timing down to the minute. So for example, he'd put on his race suit 30 minutes before the race. He'd get into the warm-up pool and he'd swim 600 meters. With 10 minutes to go, he'd walk into the red room and he'd find a seat alone, positioning his goggles on one side of him and his towel on the other. He would do the same series of stretches when he got to the starting blocks. He also had a routine for what to think about as he went to sleep and first thing when he woke up. Now, this mental rehearsal put him in the race situation again and again and again. So when it came time to actually race, he was literally just following the script that he'd followed hundreds of times before. Phelps did what many people at the top of their game do. He took something inherently difficult and uncomfortable and made it routine and comfortable. So how do you use routines to support your own resilience? Well, as we know, every day is different, right? Some days you feel motivated, some days you don't. Some days you're tired and stressed. Some days events conspire to stop you from doing the things that you know you should be doing. So learning how to stick to a routine in any area of your life can help you to build resilience because you get into the habit of doing it, whether you feel like it or not. So whether it's a an ice bath after training, going for a swim in the ocean 365 days a year, getting up each morning at 5 a.m. no matter what. Maybe it's intermittent fasting, or I don't know, maybe it's just reading something educational for an hour each day. But building a routine, a daily discipline of consistent habit, can help you to feel more in control. And for a leader, when the pressure is on, that feeling of being able to control your own mental and emotional state, well, it's everything. Now, I want to finish by giving you a few hacks for pushing yourself to do hard things. The only way you build resilience is to become more and more comfortable in the face of adverse circumstances. The trick is to force yourself to practice when you don't feel like it. So how do you push yourself to do hard things? Well, the first hack is to look outside of yourself. If you focus inwardly on yourself, your own feelings, your fears, your doubts, you'll find it really difficult to step into hard situations. Self-preservation is going to override virtually everything else. And then you'll rationalize as to why you don't really need to do the thing that deep down you know you should be doing. So think about how stepping into the breach will benefit others. Ask yourself, what would this mean to someone else? Now, for example, there are many situations where you may need to step in and intervene to correct a performance shortfall in your team. It's easy to let it slide if you only think about the potential negative consequences for you personally. You might get some pushback, or you might be seen as being too picky or overly tough. But instead, try to think about the potential consequences of allowing that lower performance standard to prevail. Eventually, team performance is going to slip, and that could be incredibly detrimental for everyone in the longer term. So think about what they need. They need to understand that the lowering of the performance standard isn't acceptable, and they need to be given the opportunity to rally and to improve. The second hack for forcing yourself to do hard things is to think of the bigger picture. We humans are conditioned to short-term thinking. What's best for me today is always going to override what's best for me in 5 years. Unless, of course, I learn to develop a long-term focus. Now, one question that I find really useful: where is this taking me? It helps me to get past the immediacy of what feels right for now, and it pushes me to consider the longer-term implications of what I'm doing. So, look, I might be perfectly happy to sit on the couch with a beer watching a football game. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I do it all the time, right? But if I allow the comfort of the short term to dominate, I'll be in a spot of bother in the long term. So asking the question, where is this taking me, gives you the opportunity to project forward so that you're more likely to choose to do something hard today because you can see the long-term payoff. If you don't look to the future, it's much more difficult to condition yourself to do hard things in the present. Now, the third hack to force yourself to do hard things is to align your goals with your actions. There's a great blog from Mark Manson, which is an excerpt from his best-selling book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F-Bomb. It's called The Most Important Question of Your Life. Now, Manson's contention is that we all say we want things. We want to be the CEO of a large company, or be a rock star, or to be a professional sports person. But rarely are we prepared to do what it takes to get there. If you want to be a professional golfer, are you prepared to hit 1,000 golf balls every single day for 10 years? Because that's what it takes. And it's only through those actions that you'll build the skill and resilience to achieve your goal. Without it, that goal is nothing more than an idle wish. Now, once you understand this principle, assuming you know what actions it would take to reach your goal, you're much more likely to do the hard things that are going to take you there. The fourth and final hack to help you to do hard things is to know that success comes with a price tag. Anyone can be successful if they're prepared to do the hard things that pay that price. There's no success without work, sacrifice, and risk. If there was, it wouldn't be worth it anyway, because everyone would be doing it. So knowing that resilience comes from facing into difficult things and mastering them takes the agonizing out of all of your decisions. It builds a strength and a confidence that you can't get any other way. I remember as if it were yesterday that feeling of running through the darkened streets of Canberra in pre-dawn sub-zero temperatures. And I felt incredibly strong as I sped past the rows of houses, which were all still in darkness, because I knew that what I was doing would build my strength, physically and mentally, in a way that most people simply weren't prepared to do. I know it sounds a little dysfunctional, but the harder something is, the more I love it. That's what brings out the best in me, and it separates me from the pack. When I hit a particularly tough obstacle, I say to myself, oh, that's awesome. This is where it gets too hard for everyone else, and they turn around and go back. But I'm not going back. I'll go over it, I'll go around it, I'll go through it. I don't care. I'm going to find a way. Now, if you can adopt this mental philosophy, you'll become incredibly resilient in no time at all. Look, there are many complex facets of human behavior and performance that play into your leadership capability. But I think resilience is one of the competencies that has a really clear path to mastery. Not because it isn't hard, it is, but it's relatively simple. You choose to do the hard things, you know yourself, and you don't shy away from accepting the inner turmoil and struggle. You know it's okay. Don't be afraid to put your feelings, your image, or even your likability at risk. As you become more resilient, obstacles that most people live in fear of just seem to melt away. You become relatively unconstrained, which is an unbelievable feeling. And your confidence soars because you live with the sense that there's nothing you aren't able to handle. If you do the easy things in life, life becomes hard. But if you do the hard things in life, life becomes easy.